What is up, Flick fans, and welcome back to my channel. As always, we're making tier lists on this channel, and today's tier list is a very special one. This is taking all of the villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or at least the ones included on this pre-made template, and placing them on a tier list or ranking them in terms of which ones I think aren't the best, which ones I think are the best, and this will be including the villain in Spider-Man Far From Home. So if you still haven't seen that movie and you don't want to know who the villain is, I would tune away from this now. If you have seen it or you just don't care, stay tuned because I will be placing whoever that is at the end of this video. Okay, as always, I need you guys commenting your thoughts down below. What tier would you place each character at, and who is your favorite villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? This isn't the
definitive #1 absolute best tier list in the world.
No, this is all just kind of like, which ones do I think are the best and which ones are my favorites? So you guys will absolutely disagree with me, no doubt, but this is all in good fun. I love making tier lists. This is a blast. And we're going to start with the first villain on the pre-made template, and that is Abomination. That's right, The Incredible Hulk is a movie that exists in the MCU. And you know what? I thought the Abomination was okay. And that's why we're going to start off and immediately place him on the okay tier. Now, some will tell you that he's absolutely a forgettable villain, and I don't blame them because he's not one that I tend to go back to and think about. But in terms of the build-up and the payoff at the end, the giant fight between he and Hulk, I thought was really cool, and I thoroughly enjoyed his presence in that movie, and he's always been one that I've been holding out for to return to the MCU like General Thunderbolt Ross did. And, you know, he could be another one that could be considered a villain, but not on the list, so we're not going to talk about him. Next up is Alexander Pierce in Captain America the Winter Soldier, who makes a return in Avengers Endgame. I love Robert Redford. I love Robert Redford as this character. I thought he was truly a great villain. Now, a lot of people would say he didn't have the impact of a Winter Soldier, but I have to disagree with that and say, yeah, I think he did. He was the guy pulling the strings. He was the Emperor to the Winter Soldiers, Darth Vader, both of which are very interesting, intriguing, and villainous characters, and I really thought he provided one of the better antagonists in the MCU. He's one that I haven't forgotten about, even if he wouldn't have popped back up in Avengers Endgame. So we move on next to Dormammu, and even though I think Dormammu is an awesome antagonist at the end to give Doctor Strange a great moment, as in Dormammu, I have come to bargain, that repetitive thing over and over, I thought that was one of the best moments in that movie. Such a great way to take out this villain, but I just didn't get the fleshing out of Dormammu that I wanted. His presence in the comics is crazy. And then he pops up at the end of Doctor Strange, and yes, he's this big, colorful CGI. He looked good, but he wasn't a character that I was super invested in. And because of that, I'm going to place him on the bad tier. Now, I'm not saying Dormammu is a bad character in the comics, because he's not, but his presence in the movie did not give me enough, even though the way that Doctor Strange took him out was awesome, and I thoroughly enjoyed Doctor Strange as a movie. Next up is Ego, aka Ego the Living Planet, and another villain that I thought was really good. I thought the relationship between he and Peter Quill was just on point. You don't get that without a Kurt Russell. If Kurt Russell did not play Ego in this movie, I don't even know if he would make the meh tier, but because he was so good as this character, yes, his character turn is a bit predictable, and the in battle was more of a CGI fest than I wanted, but as a villain, especially compared to the first Guardians, I think he is good, and that's why I'm going to place him on the good tier. Next up, we have Ghost, and Ghost is a character that I was very fearful for going in because I didn't know a lot about her character. I didn't know if she could be this antagonist that Ant-Man deserved. I don't think she was the antagonist that Ant-Man deserved. She didn't get the fleshing out that I think her character needed, but it was better than I anticipated it to be. It wasn't the focus of the movie, clearly, because Ant-Man and the Wasp is all about Ant-Man and the Wasp. The villains are on the back burner, and we'll talk about that more here in a bit. But Ghost, at the end of the day, was kind of a meh villain. They tried to build her up with Lawrence Fishburne and give her a good story of where she came from and how she got to where she is now, and I do want to see more from her. Maybe she will move up my rankings in the future, but as for right now, she's meh because I don't go back and think about her very often. Next up is Justin Hammer. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed Justin Hammer. I don't love Iron Man 2. I've went on record and said it's one of my least favorite movies in the MCU, but the saving grace, other than Robert Downey Jr. clearly in that movie, is Justin Hammer. The guy is just everything Tony Stark is, but on the bad side. He's clearly this villainous dude. He wants to do everything for himself. He's self-centric. He's what Tony Stark kind of was before he took the mantle of Iron Man. And because of that, I think he deserves to be on the good tier. For me, not everyone's going to love him because, once again, Iron Man 2, not everyone's cup of tea. But if there is a standout other than Tony Stark, it's Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer. We're just getting all the good ones out of the way. Next up is Hela. And Hela was someone that I was slightly disappointed in the first time I watched Thor Ragnarok because I wanted it to be a bit more epic than it was. And then repeat after repeat viewing, the more I watched Thor Ragnarok, first off, you guys watched my ranking video, the more it moved up that list. And then the more I got on board with what Hela was trying to do, right? Hela was trying to change the way that Asgard was working. Clearly they covered up all of this history with her and her father before he kind of turned and went more the good route. But then she takes out a lot of characters that we care about in this series. She literally killed the Warriors 3 of the main characters from the first Thor. I mean, she did a lot of damage, and she kind of ushers in what the apocalypse is going to be for Ragnarok for Asgard. I just thought she was really good as a villain. Actually, I thought she was great as a villain. Because of that, I'm going to place her on the great tier. One that took a bit to grow on me, but after looking back on it, she did a lot of damage, and she had a big impact, and you can't go wrong with that casting. She's so good as Hela. Next up, we have Ironmonger, and it just feels like we're getting all of the good villains out of the way. That's right, I do believe Ironmonger is a good villain. Now, was the end battle disappointing? Yes, but you have Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane, a guy who is jealous of Tony Stark clearly and just wants to take over this company. He was the first villain in the MCU, and for a long time people said, well, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they have a villain problem. Clearly, they just can't hit the right note. And I'm looking at that saying, yeah, a lot of the villains aren't very good, but you started out with Jeff Bridges as Ironmonger, and up until the final, I think, 20 minutes, he was a fantastic villain. The end battle wasn't the best. It was a bit anticlimactic. Otherwise, I thought the guy provided for one of the better villains in the MCU, and that's why I'm placing him on the good tier. Now, we come to Casillas, and just one of the more forgettable villains, just to put it nicely, in the MCU. I actually think Casillas is worse than Dormammu. I'm going to put him, unfortunately, on the awful tier, just because I got nothing from his character other than some really cool special effects and some great fight scenes, but they did not give us a reason why he was doing what he wanted to do, right? They tried to build it up in the beginning, but the focus of this movie was on Doctor Strange, and clearly, I don't like the villains in Doctor Strange. So, Austin, how do you still think this is a good movie? Because they were pushed to the back burner, but they gave us a really good story and fleshed out his character, how he became Doctor Strange. Because of that, it relegated these villains to be in the background. Now, if you like Casillas or Dormammu, I can't blame you, because once again, great to look at, awesome fight scenes, and the way they both went out was really entertaining, but looking at their character development, I have to put them on the bottom two tiers. Then we come to Killmonger, and Killmonger's a bit more divisive than I think he should be. To me, clearly, he's one of the best villains we've had in the MCU. Some people didn't like how he went out, some people didn't like certain lines of dialogue, a bit too on the nose. I thought he was so great because Michael B. Jordan, the performance was outstanding, and two, you kind of understand his motivations. It's a bit like Loki. You understand why he's doing what he's doing almost just as much so as you understand why Black Panther is doing what he's doing. And he almost stole the movie from Black Panther. I would even argue that he did steal the movie. And because of that, I'm going to place Killmonger on the awesome tier. Now, this is the point in the video where a lot of people turn on me and say, Austin, his performance was just outstanding in the film, and I was captivated every single time he was on screen. Now, why is the character of Ulysses Klaue not on this list? I'm not for sure, but I'm actually so upset about that. I'm going to create my own little thumbnail here, and I'm going to place Ulysses Klaue on this list, and I'm going to put him on the good tier. This guy was thoroughly entertaining. Andy Serkis is fantastic in this movie. I don't understand why this wasn't on the pre-made template, but hey, if you made this template, I appreciate you doing it. And no, Ulysses Claw wasn't the focus of Black Panther, clearly, but I just thought the guy had good character development. We saw him in Age of Ultron. He got his arm chopped off, and then he turned it into a weapon. I was so excited to see him. He did not disappoint. He was a good villain. Next up, we're just knocking out the big hitters here. You guys know where Loki's going. I mean, clearly he is an awesome villain, one of the best villains in the MCU. The guy just brings us that incredible relationship with his brother. It's the brotherly relationship. We've seen it in other movies plenty of times, but it's handled so differently in this movie, and Tom Hiddleston as this character just consistently brings us something. He's so good. The character is dead, and they're still giving him a series on Disney+. That's how good he is. They don't want to let him go. I don't blame them. I want to see as much Loki as I possibly can, even though he's technically dead in the universe. Barring what happened in Endgame, there may be another version of him floating around, but I love Tom Hiddleston. I love his relationship with Chris Hemsworth, and I just think in the Avengers especially, he brought us one of the best villains I have ever seen. You understand his motivations, and that's what makes a great villain. You know what doesn't make a great villain? Everything that they did to Malekith. And I'm going to spoil this. He is my least favorite villain in the MCU. I think Casillas is pretty awesome, but I think Malekith is just another level. I should have created a Malekith tier. It would have been smart, but the guy just forgettable, not entertaining whatsoever. The way he talked, his line delivery was just like this. And I was just never on board with his plan. I never understood his motivations. The actor has since come out and just said how bad of a time he had playing this character, and he's basically turned his back on the movie. And you know what? I don't blame him. Whether it's his fault or the dialogue or whatever, wow, what a snooze fest. Snooze fest here. That would have been a good one. Okay, let's talk about Red Skull real quick. So you have Hugo Weaving, one of the better character actors of our generation. Always plays a good villain. Do you know he's Megatron in Transformers? That's pretty cool. But the guy is perfect casting for Red Skull, a character in which I think is really good. Now, we have to take into account all of the versions of Red Skull, and since we have seen him after the first Avenger, he's not necessarily a villain. He's just kind of the guy guarding over the Soul Stone, a soul for a soul. But in Captain America, the first Avenger, what a great villain he was. I needed a bit better of an in-battle scene. The action scene wasn't the best I've ever seen, but the build-up, kind of like an Ironmonger, even though I'm actually going to place him on a tier above that. I'm going to put him on the great tier because I thoroughly enjoyed Red Skull. Such a cool thing seeing him come to life after being such a big fan of him in the comic books and in the animated series, which Red Skull is also really, really good in. The next villain we're talking about is Ronan, and I'm a bit torn because there's something there that has so much potential. Ronan is a character that I want to see more of, and then he gets cast in Captain Marvel. Oh, good, we get more Ronan. We get him growing into the character that we kind of see in Guardians of the Galaxy, just not a lot of fleshing out there. And then it's the same thing with Captain Marvel. He just gets 5 minutes of screen time. It's like, why was he there other than to say Ronan was in that scene? I'm going to place him on the bad tier because he's never given me what I wanted him to give me as a villain. He was the weak point of Guardians Volume 1 to me. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite in the MCU. If it wasn't for Ronan, it may actually be like top 3 for me. But he didn't really do anything to enhance the movie. I get it. The focus was on the team. That's what it needed to be on. That's why the movie's so good. But his line delivery, in the same vein as Malekith, was just very flat, and he didn't do enough to make me appreciate him as the villain. And I know it's a bit harsh, and I'm going to get some pushback for it, because some people do enjoy Ronan as a villain. He wasn't for me, that's all I'll say. And we move on to Sony Birch. Sorry, it took me a second just to realize who he was. Okay, this guy is utterly forgettable. Walton Goggins is a great actor. As in Tomb Raider, he was wasted in that movie. He was a bit wasted in this movie. I can't say he's awful because he just didn't strike me in a way that was, wow, this guy does not need to be here like these other two villains in the awful tier. But I did think he was good enough to be bad, if that makes sense. He just didn't do enough. He was over the top. You didn't take advantage of his acting talents because the guy is such a layered actor. He can bring so much depth to his characters. They didn't allow him to flex his acting muscles in this movie, and that was disappointing. Once again, a bit harsh, but the MCU had a villain problem for a while, and this is kind of showcasing the fact that their villains just don't measure up to the top tier villains. in the MCU, which are, for some reason, significantly better. A villain that had the potential to be really, really good. One that I wanted to just bring down the house. That was Ultron. You have James Spader as the voice. You have Tony Stark and Bruce Banner creating this entity, killing Jarvis in the process. You have so many great things that spawned potential. And I'll be honest, when he first shows up in this movie, I'm like, that's the Ultron I want. But then he becomes a bit too much like Tony Stark, and you get the giant army of Ultron villains in the end, and it just becomes a repetitive process that we had seen with Loki, but Loki did it a lot better. Even though his voice wasn't as sinister, he was a more sinister villain. I still don't think Ultron is a bad villain. I think he gets a bit too much flack for being one of the worst villains in the MCU, but just because you're utterly disappointing does not mean you're one of the worst. For me, anyway. Because of that, I'm going to say Ultron was okay. I wanted him to be good. I wanted him to be great. At the end of the day, he's okay. You know what's better than okay? The Vulture. I thought the Vulture was just so good in Spider-Man Homecoming. Michael Keaton, you know what you're getting with him. He's going to be menacing. He's going to try his best to take Spider-Man down. Yeah, that's what you get with the Vulture. That's who the Vulture is. But he brought a new dynamic to the Vulture, and it's that, personal relationship that we expect with Spider-Man, but it's all about the turn. About 3/4 of the way through the movie, when he discovers who Peter actually is, that's when it really kicked into full gear for me, and I saw that menacing yet lovable Michael Keaton that I know and love when he plays a character like this. And oh my God, man, he blew my socks. I knew he was going to be good. I take nothing away from that, but he was so good that he completely blew me away. I think he's one of the best villains in the MCU. Not everyone is going to agree with me. I know I keep saying that, but it is a very testy thing to put Vulture on the awesome tier, but I did it in my Spider-Man villains tier, so I have to be consistent, and I had to put Michael Keaton as the Vulture on the awesome tier. We move on to Whiplash. Iron Man 2. I said I really enjoyed Justin Hammer for what he gave us in Iron Man 2. Whiplash was one of the reasons why it was so disappointing for me, because he was, at the end of the day, kind of a bad villain. There was a lot to his character, but it's all about the execution, and I don't think the execution was there. It was choppy. His storyline felt familiar, but too familiar. It tried to harken back to things in the comic books, but it just didn't execute. And at the end of the day, his character was a bit bland. And then the fight at the end, the racetrack fight, was good, and that's what's kind of keeping me from putting him on the awful tier, but the fight at the end was so underwhelming. War Machine's part was cool when he comes in and starts being the War Machine that we know and love now, but Whiplash comes in and just dies almost immediately. Very underwhelming, very disappointing, and at the end of the day, it's kind of a bad villain. You know who wasn't a bad villain when he was a villain? That's the Winter Soldier, and it's hard to put the Winter Soldier on a tier talking about villains because we love Bucky so much right now, but when he was being controlled, puppeted like we were talking about earlier with Alexander Pierce, he was a pretty bad guy. And yes, he wasn't wanting or trying to do this, he was being mind controlled, but he was still a villain. That makes him a villain, and he was a great villain. I mean, he takes out Nick Fury, he catches Captain America's shield, he's in the shadows constantly, he shot Black Widow. The guy is awesome. And because of that, I want to put him on the same tier as Alexander Pierce. He's a great villain. I mean, Winter Soldier, you have a 1-2 punch, plus the fact that Captain America is incredible in the movie. That's one of the reasons why it's my favorite movie, or one of my favorite movies, is because those two characters are just such a good 1-2 punch. Next up, we are talking Yellow Jacket, and Yellow Jacket is a character that I absolutely wanted more from, right? You see the casting, you see what his character could be in the trailer. It did remind me a bit of Obadiah Stane, Monger from Iron Man 1, but the execution wasn't as well thought out as I think Ironmonger was. It was a bit more flat. I don't think he's a bad villain. I truly don't. I think he did enough in Ant-Man, and he was menacing enough. And the fact that he went after Paul Rudd's daughter in that movie, or Scott Lang's daughter in that movie, the chemistry there is just so good. That made him very menacing. And because of that, I'm going to put him on the okay tier. I think I like him maybe a bit more than other people, but once again, nothing more than okay. He was fine for what it was. Next up, we have Yann Raagh, and Yann Raagh was a villain that, oh my gosh, you have this casting. Jude Law? Are you kidding me? You get Jude Law to start out as the good guy. Give us a predictable character twist. I think we all knew where that storyline was going, but you have an actor of that caliber playing the villain. and an actor that played an underwhelming villain for me. He just didn't do enough in this movie to make me appreciate the fact that they got Jude Law for this role. He was fine, and I liked the character twist, albeit predictable. I thought it was okay, but at the end of the day, he wasn't anything more than meh for me. I'm not going to put him on the bad tier because even though we have really strong actors in the bad and awful tier, their characters were just written in such a way. Yann Raagh was written in a way that was good enough, but with Jude Law, I needed a lot more. So because of that, he was kind of meh for me. Next up is Zemo, and here's another one that is a bit divisive. I know many people that hate Zemo in this movie because his plan, and I will admit, his plan, there were a lot of things that had to come into place perfectly for it to work out. And it did. Okay, a bit edgy, a bit on the nose, but I really liked his motivation. I really liked the subplot with the family, and I love how, at the end of the day, he kind of did win. He pit our heroes against each other. Now, those conflicts have since been resolved, but he did what he set out to do. And that last line that he says, "Your plan failed," and then he just looks at him and goes, "Did it?" I mean, that line was so menacing. His entire relationship with our characters and that moment with Black Panther I thought was awesome. So, yeah, I thought Zemo was a good villain. Now, other characters in that movie are made out to be more of a villain. If you're on Iron Man's side, Captain America's the villain. If you're on Captain America's side, Iron Man is the villain. He was just kind of a cog in the machine, but he was a good cog, and I thought the acting was brilliant on his part. Now, before we get into Thanos, who is the final character on this template, we have to talk about one more character that I told you guys we would talk about. That is the villain in Spider-Man Far From Home. Spoilers in 3, 2, 1. It's not a spoiler. If you guys know anything about Spider-Man, we knew this was coming. We knew Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio was going to be the villain. It's all about how did that turn go. And I'm not going to spoil what it is, when it is, where it is, anything about that. All I'm going to say is, I love the execution. I think Jake Gyllenhaal is awesome in this movie. When it comes out that he is the villain to Spider-Man in this film, his acting is so good, and those scenes, and if you guys have seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about, where he is quote-unquote fighting Spider-Man, some of the most mystifying scenes visually, just audibly, everything about it, they were incredible. And this is the Mysterio that I wanted from the comic books. That's the best testament I can give any of these characters. If you are comic book accurate. Now, it did change one massive thing about his character to kind of update it and incorporate 2019 into it. But as a comic book fan, I loved that. I thought it worked. And once again, Jake Gyllenhaal was awesome. And I'm putting Mysterio on the awesome tier. I truly think he's an awesome villain. And you know who else I think is awesome? I think Thanos is my favorite villain. That's why I saved him for last. I actually moved the template around a little bit to do that. But he is my favorite villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And you know what? Let's go ahead and place him on his tier. But we're not going to place him on the awesome tier because he's Thanos. Thanos needs to snap in another tier. And we're going to put Thanos on the Thanos tier. Austin, you couldn't come up with something more creative? Nope. But I love Thanos. Listen. He stands above the rest because, one, he accomplished his mission. Other villains have done that in the MCU. But two, he did it. He wiped out half the universe, and then he died. Now, he did die by the hands of Thor, by the hands of our hero, but before that, he accomplished his mission. He did it. I am inevitable. So that version of Thanos won. Then we flash back to the 2014 version of Thanos. That version didn't win, but he still saw himself win. So even though at the end of the day, after Avengers Endgame, Thanos is no more and everybody was brought back and things were happy-go-lucky, yay, he still won. He still killed Iron Man. He still killed multiple Avengers. He is the most detrimental supervillain of all time. And Josh Brolin is so good as this. I mean, so good as this character. I love him. I love his portrayal. I thought Thanos was remarkable in Avengers Infinity War. Not as good in Avengers Endgame. He was more of a battle-ready, battle-heavy. Thanos didn't get as fleshed out as I wanted him to be. They didn't revisit his daughter's storyline with the Soul Stone, all of those things. But overall, the combination of the two, he's my favorite villain in the MCU. One of my favorite villains of all time. Possibly my favorite villain of all time. Got to take that up with Heath Ledger's Joker, but my God, what a competition that is. Guys, That is my Marvel Cinematic Universe tier list. It is a very personal tier list, so not everyone, like I said, is going to agree. Now, when people say the MCU has a villain problem, maybe you look at this and say, well, see a lot of good, see a lot of greats. Of course, there's going to be people that disagree, but maybe it's not as bad of a villain problem as we thought, even though the villains that are bad, as you can see in that bad and awful tier, ugh, they are not my favorite. At the end of the day, we can all love and appreciate superhero movies, super villains, all of these things. And I need you guys to comment your lists in the comments down below and recommend what's another good tier list to do. I've done MCU movies, I've done villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I've done Spider-Man villains. Should I do an Aunt May tier list? Let me know if you want to see that. Appreciate you guys watching this video. So much fun as always, and I will catch you very soon.